Going Down Fighting by LeilahMoon. Read by Ella Max Mabella. Chapter 13. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lessons and homework, the majority of which Hermione thoroughly enjoyed. It was planning the inter-house event that was causing the most stress. It appeared most of the 8th years wanted a Quidditch tournament, much to her lament. Draco slept in her room every night to ward off nightmares, both his own and hers, but that was it. Nothing else happened. Every morning, though, she would see him sat at one end of their table, carefully writing various letters. He refused to tell her who he was owling, only that it was part of his apparent master plan. Hermione had been sending owls of her own, primarily to Harry and Ron, neither of whom were particularly forthcoming with their replies. They gave vague answers and general descriptions about their aura training. Harry had a few more updates to share from Patrick about her parents, but nothing conclusive yet. He told her to keep hope. The week before Christmas holidays, it seemed that Draco's plans had finally come to fruition. When the post arrived in the Great Hall, each and every morning, a large, mottled grey-brown, great-horned owl would settle beside her and deposit a gift before seeking out Draco for petting. Pansy's eyes grew wide when she saw the scarlet and silver color-shifting gem cloistered in Tuesday's present. Hermione moved to brush her fingers across the bracelet, remembering the moment he had given it to her many years ago, but Pansy gripped her wrist and asked, "Do you know what that will mean?" Hermione nodded. Draco had told her before that within pureblood culture it was customary to give jewelry as a symbol of intention, part of a betrothal contract. She wasn't ready to wear it again quite yet. There were still things she needed to think about, but she took it from the box and placed it carefully in her pocket. On Friday, the final day of classes for the year, Hermione was checking her satchel to ensure she had everything ready. When Draco stood and moved around the table towards her, she glowered at him, concerned about what he was planning to do next, but tried to convince herself that Draco Malfoy absolutely did not enjoy public displays of affection. She was wrong. Draco stopped in front of her with a slight smirk and said, "Granger, will you accompany me to Hogsmeade tomorrow?" It was completely unnecessary to ask such a question in front of the entire Great Hall, and Hermione felt as though she had no choice but to acquiesce. She nodded, but under her breath hissed, "What about your parents, Draco?" "All sorted," he said quietly before announcing loudly, "It's a date." Hermione only just managed to refrain from rolling her eyes in response. Wandering into Hogsmeade the next morning, Draco caught her hand with his and entwined their fingers together. "This okay?" he asked. "Oh, if you're sure," she replied, and he nodded. "I bet you never realized I could be so expressive." "No, Draco, I did not," she groaned, trying to hide the smile on her face. "Tell me again why it was necessary to express yourself in front of the entire Great Hall?" "Well, I had to ensure everyone was aware of my intention towards you, didn't I?" Hermione smiled. "Intentions, perhaps, but nothing's confirmed yet, is it?" He was too busy glowering to notice. She had lifted the sleeve of her robe to reveal the bracelet he had now twice gifted her. "Draco," she prompted, rolling her eyes. His Adam's apples bobbed as he glimpsed her wrist, and swallowing slowly, he ground out, "Granger?" They had stopped in the middle of the path. His hands moved to cup her chin, one thumb drawing circles on her cheekbone. Hermione's heart pounded as she stared up at him. Even after all this time, she still couldn't quite believe that he was over a head taller than her. "We need to go slowly," she told him. "There's a lot we need to discuss, but Draco, I want you. I want us." "Fuck, Hermione, I love you," she chuckled. "I think you might need a few lessons in going slow, Malfoy." Smirking, he grabbed her hand again and pulled her into the little village. "So, where are you taking me on this fantastic date of yours?" His smirk widened. "Have you ever been to Madame—" "Oh, Merlin, no!" she interrupted, mouth agape. "I'm absolutely joking, Granger. We are not setting foot in that establishment." Hermione laughed, tightening her grip on his hand. "Thank God, Rick." "Hermione!" someone called from behind her. She immediately recognized a familiar voice and, glancing briefly up at Draco, reluctantly turned around. The smile that had initially flooded Ron's face was quickly replaced by a grimace as he absorbed the image before him. Hermione and Draco, fingers laced together. He glanced up and down, left to right. "What's this?" Nobody moved. Hermione and Harry stared at each other, panic etched onto their features. Would anybody like to update me? Ron snarled, his voice low. His heart stopped as Draco took a step forward, held out his hand, and said, Weasley? Hermione barely heard the curse that emanated from Ron's mouth before he launched himself at Draco, fists bared. Don't you fucking touch her! He yelled. She attempted to leap in front of Draco, but he caught her arms and pushed her gently to the side. Weasley, Draco drawled, don't embarrass yourself. It would have been absolute chaos if Draco hadn't somehow managed to hold himself back and simply dodge each attack aimed towards him. Harry, she whispered angrily, don't just stand there. Her statement seemed to urge the trainee aura into action. Harry dove between the two of them. Stop this! Ron paused to stare at his best friend. You okay with this? It's not our decision, Harry said. I trust Hermione, and so should you. No, he shouted. She's clearly not in her right mind. We need to do something about this. Hermione was fuming. Ronald, how dare you? I'm absolutely capable of making my own choices. Who do you think you are? Ronald looked mollified for a moment until he caught sight of Draco again. Have you all fucking forgotten who he is, what he's done? There was silence. He, Ron pointed savagely at Draco, aside from bullying us for years and trying to kill Dumbledore, just watched Hermione get tortured on the floor of his fucking manor, most concerned with how they might remove the fucking bloodstains. She knew the second these words left his mouth that Draco would break. Get out of my fucking face, Draco spat. You know nothing about what happened that night. I would have done anything for Hermione. Ron sneered. Yeah, but you didn't, though, did you, Malfoy? As Draco took another step forward, Hermione suddenly noticed the crowd they were drawing in. Can we continue this conversation somewhere a bit more private? She asked brusquely. No, Ron snapped and turned to leave. I'm not going nowhere with him or you. Harry looked apologetically at Hermione before running after their friend. Chapter 14. They tried not to let the confrontation with Ron ruin the rest of their afternoon, but this proved challenging. Draco had become sullen and withdrawn, and Hermione couldn't stop ruminating about everything that had been said. To some extent, she understood Ron's response. He would have been shocked, and she was sure his reaction was born out of concern for her. However, from experience, Hermione also knew just how long Ron's moods could last for, and so she was decidedly not looking forward to spending Christmas between Grimmauld Place and the Burrow. It was going to be painful enough without her parents, and now 1/3 of their trio was furious. After some last-minute Christmas shopping and a brief drink at the Three Broomsticks, Hermione and Draco decided to head back to Hogwarts. It had become progressively colder, and she shivered, pulling her robe tightly round her. Draco silently cast a warming charm and tucked her into him. You know, when you mysteriously said you had sorted it with your parents, Hermione said as they walked, what exactly did you mean? Draco huffed, and a plume of white steam drifted from his mouth. Well, my father has enough years in Azkaban to come to terms with it, and my mother actually already knew. Hermione made to interrupt, shock etched across her face, but he scowled and she reluctantly indicated for him to continue. She already knew, because when I got the mark, my occlumency shields were down and she saw you. What happened? Hermione asked, eyes wide. At the time, she said I needed to stay away from you to keep us both safe. He frowned. And we know how well that. Anyway, I wrote a letter last week to let her know that I was planning on courting you publicly. She couldn't help but flush at the old-fashioned term. And what was her response? That if it makes me happy, it's fine with her. I don't think it was particularly unexpected anyways, given what she already knew, as well as my response when you were at the manor. Draco shook his head, as if trying to rid himself of the memories. There wasn't anything you could do, you know that. Hermione could see the pulse throbbing in his neck as he said, Weasley wasn't entirely wrong, though, was he? I was weak. I've always been weak. I should have been able to help you. Draco gave a hollow laugh. I'm surprised he didn't mention that I almost killed him and Belle. You didn't have a choice, she argued. He had stopped walking now, despite the bitterly cold wind. Hermione gazed up at him as his eyes grew darker and he stood rigid and tense. I did, though, he said quietly. You tried to help me, even Snape did. But no, I refused. Thought I could do it by myself. You were doing what you felt was best for your family. Ron doesn't know the whole story. You're a good person who, yes, maybe could have done some things differently, but you deserved a chance to move on, and I don't deserve that. I don't deserve to be happy. He snapped, lifting his arms helplessly before gesturing to Hermione. And I certainly don't deserve you. Stop! She shouted louder than intended. Stop this! He looked at her in surprise, and she carried on. I know you've not said very much about what it was like here last year, but I've heard bits and pieces from Ginny and Neville. From what it sounded like, you tried your best to help those who needed it. You've been forced into awful situations that no person, let alone a child, should find themselves in. Slipping her hands beneath his warm robe, she wrapped her arms around his waist and pulled their bodies tightly together. You, Draco Malfoy, are one of the most stubborn, frustrating, ridiculous, dramatic— Are you trying to make me feel worse, Granger? He grumbled into her hair. Sorry, I got carried away, she chuckled, poking his ribs. But you're also protective, fiercely loyal, intelligent, funny. You've been there for me time and time again, and I love you so much. Draco was silent for a while, his breathing uneven, and Hermione was sure the top of her head felt damp. Eventually he said quietly, I can't lose you again. You never lost me, Draco. The Christmas period passed, much as Hermione had imagined it would. She missed her parents desperately and struggled without a routine and structure that Hogwarts provided. Although Ron refused to speak more than a few words to her at a time, he had been more cordial than she expected. Hermione wondered whether this might have been Ginny's influence. Having made the decision that it wouldn't be fair on anyone to sleep in the same bed as Harry anymore, she had been concerned about the nightmares that would inevitably pursue her. However, each night she would feel her ring heat up, and the words, "You are safe," would appear. It seemed that Draco had not forgotten his Muggle abbreviation techniques. When January finally came around, Hermione was more than ready to return to Hogwarts. She arrived later than usual, due to first stopping for tea with Hagrid, and so the castle was unusually quiet. Flying up the great stone steps and into the entrance hall, she strode quickly to the 8th year common room. The holidays had allowed her time and space to reflect, and she knew that she was finally ready to give Draco everything. He stood when he saw her, smiling hesitantly at her flushed face, and absently ran his fingers through his hair. Without preamble, Hermione leapt into his arms, wrapping her legs around him. Draco gripped her firmly as she crushed her lips to his. Swallowing the sound of her name, she moved away for a moment to catch her breath, but he pulled her back and kissed her again. The sound of whoops and clapping brought her back into the room, and suddenly remembering where they were, Hermione blushed furiously and made to get down, but Draco held on to her tightly. Lifting his middle finger to their peers, he carried her upstairs and into his room. To be continued. Thank you for listening to Going Down Fighting by LeilahMoon, read by LeilahMoon. If you would like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, AO3, Instagram, or Tumblr.